Dia Brusma. I'm the Pokja Gender, the work group of the Gender and Religion Consortium, the Netherlands Indonesian Muslim Christian Relations. Welcome you all today. Sorry, just got interrupted by the recording. As you can see, it is recorded and it will be put up in our website later on. I welcome all of you. I welcome all my all speaker, Mr. Ruard Ganzevoort.
Selamat datang kepada semuanya. Selamat datang kepada para pembicara.
Wijaya Mulya and then Bojana. And without further ado, I hope you all enjoyed the event today. We have selected 4 different speakers from all different backgrounds as well. This is, I must say, is one of the kind. We're going to bring all on the table all that what the text say about the LGBTQI community and all the dilemma and all the issues that is current in our time now. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator today, Naila. Good morning from the Netherlands, Naila.
Good morning, Bayus, and good morning, everybody.
Yeah, this is from the Pusat Riset Research Gender Study of University of Indonesia. Please, Naila, you can start introduce our speaker and moderate the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bayus. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Indonesia and good morning, everybody in Netherlands. Honorable speakers, experts, and audiences. First of all, allow me to greet all of you. Welcome to the webinar, Why Can't I Love the One I Love? Reviewing Sexual Orientation and Gender Fluid Expressions through the lens of religious texts. My name is Naila. I'm from Gender Studies Research Center of Gender Studies Graduate Program, School of Strategic and Global Studies, Universitas Indonesia. And today I'd like to assist you as the moderator of this webinar. And I'm so honored to have you today. And it's a great occasion for us because we are going to listen and discuss with 4 outstanding speakers who will deliver their presentations, and allow me to introduce them. The first speaker is Prof. Dr. Ruard Ganzevoort. Prof. Dr. Ruard Ganzevoort is the Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Professor of Practical Theology at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. His main areas of interest in the field of religion are trauma, sexuality, conflict, identity, and popular culture. He has also published or edited 27 books and more than 210 scientific or professional publications since June 2011. He is also a member of the Senate in the Dutch National Parliament for the Green Party GroenLinks. He is the spokesperson for the primary and secondary education, defense, home affairs, and kingdom affairs. And the second speaker is Prof. Dr. Mufidah, Magister of Religious Studies. He is a professor of UIN Maulana Malik Ibrahim. And Professor Dr. Mufidah and Islamic Law Studies in UIN Maulana Malik Ibrahim. And she is also a national and international consultant for the gender mainstreaming and mainstreaming programs. And our third speaker is Mr. Teguh Wijaya Mulya. He is a lecturer of University of Surabaya. Mr. Dr. Teguh Wijaya Mulya earned his bachelor degree in Psychology, Faculty of Psychology in Universitas Surabaya. He earned He's Doctor of Philosophy in University of Auckland, New Zealand. He is an expert in the areas of sexuality, gender, religion, and neoliberalism. His work is inspired by the work of Michel Foucault and post-structuralist feminism, and it's so very interesting. His research has been published in reputable journals, including Asian Studies
Beliau
Review,
juga memiliki publikasi yang banyak dalam
Media Psychology, Sexuality,
jurnal
Culture,
internasional,
and the International Journal for Academic
media dan
Development.
seksualitas,
Our fourth speaker
budaya
is
dan
Dr. Bojana
seksualitas, dan
Radovanovic.
lain-lain.
She is a classical philologist
Dan
with
yang terakhir
BS
adalah
in
beliau berada di
History of Christianity with the Department of Textual, Historical, and Systemic Studies of Judaism and Christianity at the Faculty of Philosophy, Theology, and Religious Studies. And now she teaches some courses on Byzantine theology and early Christianity at Ripon University, Nijmegen. And without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Prof. Ganzevoort, to deliver his presentation. Before I'm going to invite Ms. Prof. Ganzevoort, I'd like to greet Prof. Ganzevoort. Hello, Prof. How are you? Hope you are great there.
Baik saja.
Yes, for Prof. Ganzevoort, you have 15 minutes for the presentation and time is yours.
Terima kasih Mbak Naila. Selamat siang teman-teman, ibu-ibu, bapak-bapak. Saya pikir topik hari ini penting sekali untuk agama-agama. But let me continue in English, which is much easier for me, and there is translation anyway. So I think our conversation is much smoother if I will speak in English. This is an important topic indeed, and the question of love, of sexuality, of gender is becoming a very important field of conflict, of debate, of controversy. So I was asked to contribute some reflections on the discussion about the Nashville Statement. Now, for those of you for whom this is maybe a new term, maybe it's a very common term already, but let me introduce it briefly. Several years ago, there was a meeting of conservative Christians in America, and they drafted what they called the Nashville Statement, which is a statement about biblical sexuality, as they call it. And in the year 2019, actually early January 2019, a Dutch version of that statement was made public and raised a lot of controversy in the Netherlands. Now, before I go into the details and the story around it, let me share my personal role also in that. Because when this Nashville Statement came out, and it was actually translated and also published by, among others, some members of my own faculty. Some lecturers at my faculty were very active in promoting it. So that's why, as a dean of the faculty, I was immediately involved. But not just that. I arrived back in the Netherlands after a December holiday in Indonesia. So for me, the Nashville discussion in Indonesia and the Netherlands are already very closely connected personally. Not only did I arrive early January, from Indonesia with a jet lag and everything, you know how that works maybe. I also had contracted a case of dengue in that holiday. So I was arriving here in the Netherlands with a high fever and all the symptoms of dengue, and feeling very sick and lying on my bed, sleeping all day, and losing weight and really feeling sick. I mean, yes, you can feel sympathy for me. I was really in a pitiful situation at that moment. But that's just my personal thing. I was in Indonesia during that holiday, also because my partner, who is from Indonesia, he was still living there at that moment. And so I came home from visiting him during the holiday, and then coming home. And basically the first day after I was at home, still feeling sick, I read that this Nashville Statement had come out. I read the statement. And I saw that some of my colleagues were involved in promoting it. And I immediately knew that this was going to be a big issue. Because not only do we have colleagues in our faculty who hold a conservative Christian perspective on gender and sexuality, we also have colleagues who have a very different view. So there will be a discussion about it. But not only that, we have colleagues who are, because they, as women, they are really, how you call it, involved in issues of gender emancipations. We have colleagues who are homosexual, lesbian. We have transgender colleague. So we have, among our students as well, we have many people who are personally involved in this whole question.
Banyak sekali yang aktif terlibat dalam statement ini. Nah, jadi apa sebenarnya arti dari national statement ini? Kenapa dia muncul? Apa yang coba dia sampaikan tentang isu ini tentang seksualitas dan gender di
basically. Now, the national statement in itself is not very original. It's not like a new message that came out. It's basically trying to repeat what has been the conservative perspective for a long time. But the statement starts by saying that and I just quote a few sentences, evangelical Christians at the dawn of the 21st century find themselves living in a period of historic transition. As Western culture has become increasingly post-Christian, it has embarked upon a massive revision of what it means to be a human being. And then it goes on that the beauty of God's design is being denied, and that the whole discussion of God's purpose of being male or female as a part of God's beautiful plan, as it is described, they say, well, nowadays it's an expression of an individual's autonomous preferences. So basically what the national statement says is that sexuality and gender are not just individual choices, as modern time may want it to be, but they are expressions of a cultural war that is going on, and which requires Christians, which requires believers of all faiths, they would say probably, to go back to the wisdom, to the truth of the revelation. So that is the key point, and they even state in this national statement, and I'm going to quote it to you again, that it is not just a matter of, for example, here it says the approval of what they call homosexual immorality or transgenderism. They say that is not a matter of moral indifference. It's not a matter that faithful Christians can agree or disagree, or agree to disagree. So they say this is something that is really close to the center of the faith. You cannot have a different opinion on this. And that, of course, makes it very difficult to have a conversation. If from the starting point you already state there's only one truth in this field, and that is the conservative view on religion, on gender and sexuality, then it is very hard to have a conversation at all. So this is part of the painful issue for many people. They say we deny that adopting a homosexual or transgender self-conception identity is consistent with God's holy purposes in creation and redemption. So basically saying if you find in yourself same-sex attractions, or you find gender dysphoria, that can all be part of the natural world, but can embrace that is against God's will. Now again, this is not a new idea. They have been basically sharing this thought for a long time, and in fact, I think the majority of Christians around the world, just as probably the majority of Muslims around the world, would agree to that. So why is it that this statement was suddenly published early 2019, and why did it start this controversy? Even to the point that I got, as a dean, I got many emails from people saying you should fire the people who wrote this statement. They should not be at the university. And people would say, well, So I was basically demanded by many people to choose between one view and the other. And I've always felt that this topic, even though I'm of course involved as a theologian, as someone who's working in gender studies and so on, also involved as someone who is himself in a homosexual relationship, for me all these topics come together. And I do believe that people can have this conservative view on gender and sexuality. But the problem arises when you say that that is the only acceptable view, and that we cannot negotiate about it, that we cannot discuss about this on theological grounds, that we cannot have the psychological discussion going on about whether our understanding of sexuality and identity are still correct. I think all that should be part of the academic theological debate. But moreover, my main issue is basically, and I'm coming from a pastoral perspective, my key issue has always been, what does this mean for people? For people who are struggling to find their lives, to be suddenly in the middle of this culture war. And that is not just the case in the Netherlands. I think it's also the case in Indonesia. For a long time, Indonesian history has been quite, let's say, inclusive of various gender views, various views of inclusion, gender identities, and even sexualities. But in the past, maybe 10, 15 years, I think we can witness, and I hope to hear more from the other speakers as well on this, we can witness that there is an increasing conservatism and an increasing one-sided view on gender and sexuality. So I'm really grateful for this webinar to challenge those thoughts and to really look into that critically, because this, let's say, one-dimensional approach, I think, is a key issue in our societies. But my question would be, why is that? Why is it that conservative Christians and conservative Muslims are today more than before identifying their religious position with a specific conservative view of sexuality and gender? And I believe that this has everything to do, of course, with international relations, geopolitical strengths, the dominance of a more liberal voice from the Western world and so on. And we see responses to that from Africa, from Asia, but also from religious groups in Europe and in America itself. But it's also a way of, let's say, by claiming that these Christian voices are different from the Western culture, and I quoted from the statement for that reason, is a way of positioning yourself. It's a way of positioning yourself in that cultural war as the defender of the Christian faith or of the Islamic faith, as the defender of religious truth against the world at large. So I think it's not just a discussion about gender per se. It's not just a discussion about sexuality. It's a discussion about the role and also the political role of religion in society. Now, interestingly enough, I think this coincides with the fact that within the conservative Christian community, and again, I think it's also the case in, for example, in conservative circles, even in Indonesia, we find that within these groups, there is more and more awareness that homosexuality, transgenders, they are part of our society. They are part of our reality. They are part of our communities. It's not just something strange happening outside, but we know more and more that within our own communities, we find, for example, lesbians, homosexuals, bisexuals, transgenders, who self-identify, who are undefendingly, unapologetically clear about their identity, and they say, we are here and we are here to stay, so deal with it. And they do so also from a religious perspective. They accept, they claim their presence within the religious community. And many people actually say, well, we cannot deny that anymore. And in response, that would be my claim, and I'm really looking forward to hear some questions or responses to that. In a response, some of the leaders on the conservative side, they would come with this kind of statement like the Nashville statement, say, well, actually, we cannot accept this. So where many people saw this is like a backlash, this is like going back to a conservative standpoint, I think that this national statement is in reality a very hopeful sign. I think it is a hopeful sign because it shows that, well, there is a cultural discussion going on, unfortunately, because that is a war that's being fought over the backs of vulnerable people. And I don't think we should have our wars harming vulnerable people. But the good sign is, the hopeful sign in my view, is that they feel the need to reiterate this conservative statement because they find that in reality, many ordinary people, many grassroots community are in fact becoming more inclusive. So I see it as a sign of the conservative perspective losing ground, or to put it more mildly, as a sign that in many cases the pastoral view of sexual and gender diversity, embracing people for who they are, giving them space for who they are, that pastoral view is becoming challenged. And the conservative outcry of the national statement, for that reason, I believe, is a sign that there is nowadays much more pastoral space than there used to be, let's say 1 or 2 decades ago. Although I'm not sure where this will end. And I fear that the polarization among this kind of statement, claim this is the only truth, or on the other hand, we don't want you to say this anymore, this conservative view cannot be proclaimed anymore. That kind of polarization is not going to help us. That kind of polarization will only harm people, especially vulnerable people, and it will not help us to build a new dialogue. So I hope that this webinar will help us to challenge our views, both on the liberal and on the conservative sides. It will challenge us to see that this is not just a Christian or an Islamic or a Buddhist or Hindu or whatever discussion within one tradition. This is a global discussion going on about inclusiveness, about polarization, about conversation. And I'm very happy for the kind of dialogue that we're hopefully going to have today. So much for now, Naila.
Thank you, Prof. Ganzevoort. It was very interesting materials that we know about the LGBT in the perspective of Christianity. And we are going to move for the second speakers, who is Prof. Dr. Mufidah, and she is going to talk about the LGBT in the Islamic perspective. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Prof. Mufidah to present her materials. For Ibu Mufidah, how are you? Apa kabar, Ibu? Semoga baik di sana.
Baik, alhamdulillah sehat.
Baik, thank you for coming, and it's very great to have you here. And Ibu, you have 15 minutes for your presentation, and time is yours. Silahkan, Ibu.
Terima kasih, selamat sore untuk semuanya, para narasumber dan juga peserta yang luar biasa. Terima kasih, saya sudah diundang untuk bisa bergabung bersama di sini dengan tema yang cukup menarik. Saya akan menyampaikan tentang kondisi dan dinamika ya, yang khususnya yang ada di Indonesia tentang pro kontra LGBT dalam pandangan Islam. Jadi saya akan membagi dua. Yang pertama adalah yang pro LGBT. Ya, jadi dalam perspektifnya biasanya menggunakan perspektif hak asasi manusia. Jadi misalnya di dalam di Indonesia sendiri, menurut Undang-Undang Nomor 39 Tahun 1999 bahwa HAM itu memang sudah merupakan anugerah Tuhan yang wajib dihormati, dijunjung tinggi, dilindungi oleh negara, hukum, pemerintah, dan setiap orang demi kehormatan serta perlindungan harkat dan martabat manusia. Oleh karena itu, siapapun yang menjadi warga negara Indonesia, maka mereka adalah mendapatkan perlindungan harkat martabatnya tanpa terkecuali apakah dia adalah orang yang memiliki orientasi gender yang beragam atau jenis kelamin laki perempuan, suku bangsa, agama, dan lain sebagainya. Kemudian di Indonesia sendiri ini menjadi perbincangan yang cukup hangat semenjak tahun 2005 sampai 2008 ya. Di situ ada beberapa mereka yang memang memiliki concern untuk membicarakan dan juga mendiskusikan dalam perspektif Islam. Ya. Bagi mereka yang pro LGBT, ya dengan perspektif Islam, mereka selalu memulainya dengan landasan bahwa Islam itu adalah agama rahmatan lil alamin, agama yang memberikan kasih sayang untuk semua umat manusia. Nah, dalam hal ini maka agama rahmatan lil alamin itu ada 3 konsep dasarnya. Yang pertama adalah untuk meningkatkan harkat dan martabat kemanusiaan. Kemudian yang kedua adalah untuk keadilan di tengah-tengah masyarakat. Dan yang ketiga adalah untuk merealisasikan kehidupan yang lebih baik, yang sejahtera, ya, dan itu adalah tanpa diskriminasi. Nah, sebagai agama rahmatan lil alamin memiliki nilai-nilai universal untuk menjawab kebutuhan setiap individu dan kelompok dengan prinsip-prinsip ini yang biasa digunakan, keadilan, demokrasi, kemanusiaan, kesetaraan, pluralisme, nasionalisme, kemudian penegakan hak asasi manusia dan kemaslahatan atau kebaikan-kebaikan yang ditimbulkan atau dampak yang baik dari semuanya. Nah, dari sini kemudian mereka yang pro LGBT selalu mengkaitkan bahwa pilihan-pilihan untuk identitas gender misalnya, kemudian juga orientasi seks yang mereka mereka sudah punya itu dianggap sebagai fitrah, dianggap sebagai given, dianggap sebagai pemberian dari Tuhan yang tidak bisa diganggu gugat dan dia harus mendapatkan hak-hak asasinya.
Was given by the God. We shouldn't question about that because that is gift from God. Based on that statement, some people in Indonesia give support
melegalkan bagaimana dengan melegalkan perkawinan sejenis, dan itu antara lain adalah sudah dilakukan oleh Profesor Mulya ya sejak tahun 2005 sampai 2008 ya, beliau mendapatkan tantangan yang luar biasa. Nah, dasar beliau dalam mencari memberikan legitimasi dari ayat-ayat Al-Qur'an, misalnya beliau mendasarkan pada landasan teologis Al-Qur'an surat Ar-Rum ayat 21 itu dengan pemaknaan yang berbeda. Yang artinya, dan di antara tanda-tanda kekuasaannya, dia menciptakan untukmu pasangan-pasangan dari jenismu sendiri, agar kalian merasa tentram kepadanya dan dijadikannya di antara kamu rasa kasih sayang. Sesungguhnya yang demikian itu benar-benar terdapat tanda-tanda bagi kaum yang berpikir. Nah, arti yang atau makna yang dimaksud menurut beliau, pasangan-pasangan dari jenismu sendiri, itu adalah bisa difahami tidak terbatas pada pasangan-pasangan antara laki-laki dan perempuan yang heteroseksual, tetapi juga beragam orientasi seksual. Jadi yang dimaksud jenismu itu adalah yang engkau memang mampu untuk melakukan pasangan dengan pasanganmu itu kehidupan kasih sayang dan mendapatkan ketentraman atau ketenangan dalam jiwamu sendiri. Nah, itu yang dimaksud oleh Ibu Musdah itu. Kemudian Bu Musda juga menyampaikan bahwa kalau didekati dengan atau menggunakan perspektif maqasidu syariah atau tujuan ditetapkannya hukum Islam, mulai dari menjaga agama, menjaga jiwa, menjaga akal, menjaga keturunan, dan juga menjaga harta benda. Dari kelima itu yang biasa digunakan untuk instrumen bagaimana mendiskusikan berbagai isu-isu terkait dengan gender dan LGBT, beliau juga memaparkan di situ bahwa yang penting manusia itu adalah bagaimana di hadapan Tuhan dia adalah orang yang tetap bertakwa. Beliau juga mengatakan bahwa manusia tidak bisa menjustifikasi amal ibadah, amal perbuatan, dosa dan sebagainya oleh sesama manusia. Yang menjustifikasi itu adalah Tuhan. Yang menyimpulkan itu adalah Tuhan. Oleh karena itu, menurut beliau bisa jadi tidak hanya heteroseksual, tetapi juga orang-orang yang memiliki keragaman, keunikan, itu dia tetap bisa menjaga agamanya, bisa menjaga harta bendanya, bisa menjaga semuanya yang saya sebutkan tadi. Nah, itu beliau sampaikan dalam beberapa forum dan mendapat tantangan yang luar biasa. Nah, kemudian yang kedua adalah kontra LGBT, itu menggunakan pendekatan hukum Islam dengan landasan teologis, ya, di mana di dalam Al-Quran tentang kisah umatnya Nabi Lut, ya. Jadi di situ panjang sekali yang intinya bahwa Tuhan atau Allah itu menyampaikan pesannya di dalam ayat ini bahwa apa yang dilakukan oleh umatnya Nabi Lut itu adalah tidak benar, merupakan perbuatan keji, merupakan perbuatan
What
yang
happened
tidak diperbolehkan. Dan di situ
in the era of Prophet Lut is inappropriate
ditimpakan
and
sebuah adab, ya, adab atau akibat dari apa yang mereka lakukan. Nah, kemudian juga ada landasan
forbidden.
teologis dalam hadis.
All of the punishment that God give is based on what they did.
Siapa yang kalian dapati melakukan perbuatan kaum Lut, ya, ini masih terkait
One of
dengan
the narrative that
Al-Quran tadi,
can be
maka
just
bunuhlah
used to
kedua belah
justify
duanya.
the
Jadi
argument
sama
of
sekali dibunuh
Prophet Lut era
ini ada di
is
dalam
Abu Dawud.
Abu Dawud. Kemudian yang kedua adalah sesungguhnya yang paling
Whoever you find doing the
yang
deeds of the
menimpa
people of
umat
Lut
adalah
can kill.
perbuatan kaum Lut. Ya, ini yang kedua. Jadi hadis ini hadis yang diriwayatkan oleh orang-orang yang termasuk dapat diterima, ya, dan dapat dijadikan sebagai landasan hukum. Nah, kemudian pendapat para imam madhab fikih. Jadi dari abad kira-kira sebelum abad pertengahan, ya, masih zaman Islam klasik itu ada para ulama, misalnya Imam Malik, Imam Syafi'i, dan Imam Ahmad bin Hambal itu menyatakan bahwa tindakan semacam liwat, ya, yang disebut dengan liwat itu ya mirip dengan LGBT, ya, mewajibkan seseorang mendapat hukuman had atau hukuman yang sudah ditentukan karena adanya makna perzinaan di dalamnya. Jadi dianggapnya adalah sama dengan perzinaan. Sedangkan Imam Abu Hanifah berpendapat pelaku liwat hanya dihukum takzir atau tidak ditentukan. Jadi bisa masih tetap sebab liwat sendiri bukanlah termasuk perbuatan zina. Jadi tidak termasuk perbuatan zina, tetapi dia tetap dihukum dengan hukuman yang alternatif gitu, yang tidak ditentukan di dalam Al-Quran atau hadis. Kemudian menurut ulama Malikiyah dan ulama Hanabilah mengemukakan bahwa pelakunya dihukum rajam, baik pelakunya itu berstatus setelah menikah maupun yang belum menikah.
Ya, ikan dari sana apa nih?
Ya. Kemudian ulama Syafi'iyah berpandangan hukum had atau yang sudah ditentukan tadi bagi pelaku liwat adalah sama dengan hukuman had zina. Jika pelaku berstatus setelah menikah maka wajib dirajam atau dilempari batu kecil-kecil sampai meninggal, ya. Sedangkan jika pelakunya berstatus belum pernah menikah maka dicambuk dan diasingkan. Jadi hal ini didasarkan pada satu hadis yang diriwayatkan oleh Abu Musa bahwasanya Rasulullah mengatakan apabila seorang laki-laki mendatangi laki-laki maka kedua-duanya telah berzina, dan apabila seorang perempuan mendatangi perempuan maka kedua-duanya adalah telah berzina. Ini yang menjadi landasan bagi mereka yang kontra. Kemudian LGBT itu diharamkan di Indonesia oleh Majelis Ulama Indonesia. Ya, jadi pada waktu itu masih Kiai Ma'ruf Amin sebagai Ketua Majelis Ulama Indonesia. Dalam konferensi persnya beliau menyampaikan mengharamkan tentang LGBT karena bertentangan dengan Pancasila, kemudian bertentangan dengan Undang-Undang Dasar 45, bertentangan dengan Undang-Undang Perkawinan. Jadi dari sini beliau juga mengemukakan tentang Fatwa Majelis Ulama Indonesia nomor 57 tahun 2014 ya, yang isinya adalah sama. Kemudian bagaimana sikap tokoh lintas agama di Indonesia? Jadi dari kalangan pemuka lintas agama yang terdiri dari Majelis Ulama Indonesia, kemudian juga dari Gereja Indonesia, kemudian perwakilan umat Buddha dari Konghucu, semuanya adalah menolak perilaku LGBT karena menyimpang dari ajaran agama dan hukum alam. Nah, di sisi lain ya tidak menerima itu, tetapi menganggap bahwa kaum LGBT itu perlu dilindungi karena mereka adalah warga negara yang memiliki hak yang sama dengan siapapun. Nah, beda lagi dengan apa yang dikemukakan oleh pakar hukum tata negara yang Prof. Mahfud MD. Beliau dalam diskusi melalui Indonesia Lions Club, dia mengatakan bahwa LGBT itu sebenarnya bisa dilarang melalui undang-undang dengan pertimbangan. Jadi ini kalau masuk di undang-undang pun juga pro dan kontra itu luar biasa. Alasannya beliau itu bisa untuk menjaga moral bangsa ya, karena masyarakat Indonesia memang agak berbeda begitu, kemudian menjunjung tinggi nilai-nilai agama karena semua agama juga tidak bisa menerima, kemudian menjaga keamanan masyarakat, menjaga ketertiban umum, karena memang prakteknya itu sering karena tidak tertampung, tidak mendapatkan edukasi, tidak terpenuhi hak-haknya, akhirnya mereka juga seringkali melakukan hal-hal yang dapat mengganggu keamanan dan ketertiban umum. Ya. Kemudian cara pandang yang bijak ya, terhadap LGBT sementara ini ya mungkin juga akan bisa berkembang terus. Yang pertama, memang realitas LGBT di Indonesia itu tetap ada dan jumlahnya pun terus bertambah. Dari tahun 2013 saja ada 119 organisasi di 28 provinsi. Dan yang kedua, mereka adalah warga negara yang memiliki hak dan kewajiban yang sama. Dan banyak juga ya saya pernah membaca satu buku tapi saya sudah lupa ya. Jadi di Indonesia itu setiap 100 orang itu kemungkinan ada kecenderungan ya. Satu kecenderungan untuk memiliki orientasi seks yang berbeda. Dan itu karena di Indonesia itu memang berbeda secara budaya, maka akan berbeda ekspresinya begitu. Kemudian perlu memang untuk membedakan antara orientasi seks dan perilaku seks LGBT. Jadi seperti Bu Musdah sampaikan juga bahwa kalau orientasi seks itu kan given gitu ya, tidak ada masalah ya. Tetapi perilaku seks itu yang bisa juga yang melakukan kekerasan, yang mengganggu ketertiban umum, ya, kemudian juga tidak menjaga harkat martabat itu bisa jadi dilakukan oleh siapapun, bisa dari heteroseks, juga bisa dari biseks, bisa dari homoseks dan lesbi dan seterusnya. Nah, banyak kasus memang di orientasi seks yang beragam, tetapi tidak masuk dalam perilaku seks yang dianggap menyimpang, ya. Sebab norma agama dan budaya itu masih mampu
By all of the sexual orientation people would
aktivitas sosial secara normal, bahkan sukses dalam berkarir. Jadi itu banyak sekali contoh-contoh di Indonesia orang yang memiliki orientasi seks yang berbeda, tetapi mereka tetap saja bisa menjalankan aktivitas dan juga kegiatan-kegiatan yang bermanfaat untuk orang banyak. Nah, hanya ada satu sebenarnya kekhawatiran menurut saya dari sekian diskusi-diskusi yang dilakukan oleh kelompok-kelompok yang pro maupun yang kontra, terutama adalah yang kontra dan yang netral mungkin ya. itu kekhawatirannya adalah sebagian masyarakat Indonesia ini adalah masih punya anggapan apakah orientasi seks itu tidak disertai dengan perilaku seks yang menyimpang. Itu aja yang sebenarnya menjadi pertanyaan yang cukup prinsip begitu. Kemudian mereka juga tidak pula melanggar ketertiban umum dan keamanan karena memang beda sekali yang sudah diatur dalam undang-undang dalam negara-negara tertentu yang sudah mengatur itu akan berbeda memang dengan model Indonesia yang belum mengatur. Jadi perilaku mereka pasti akan berbeda, belum ada edukasi, belum ada aturan-aturan yang ditetapkan. Ya, saya kira itu. Terima kasih banyak dan saya akhiri salam sehat untuk semuanya.
Thank you so much for Prof. Mufidah. Terima kasih Ibu Mufidah. It was very wonderful, and we know that from her presentation that in Islamic perspective there are pros and cons about the LGBTQ, and for the pro side, it is a diversity for the universe, and it is a blessing for God because we know that the sexual orientation is God-given for us, so we cannot deny it. But from the con side, it's unlawful, and everyone will hate the deviation of the sexual deviation because of course maybe they think that it can be harmful for the society. And it's very interesting to know about the sexuality and the gender diversity in the Islamic perspective. And for the next speaker, we are going to discuss also about the sexuality in the Christianity perspective, and the discussion is Dr. Teguh Wijaya Mulya. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Teguh Wijaya Mulya. How are you, sir? Hope everything great there. And you have 15 minutes for your space, and time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naila. Right, okay. Selamat pagi dan selamat sore for you both in the Netherlands and Indonesia. It is an honor to be invited to speak here together with these amazing speakers. Today, I will share my ongoing research with my colleague Amadio Udampo on affirming evangelicals in Indonesia, particularly in Pentecostal traditions. While discussing the ways religious texts, and traditions have discriminated against LGBT people is important.
Ketika kita mendiskusikan bagaimana agama-agama mendiskriminasi LGBT, saya juga percaya bahwa mengeksplor kemungkinan
situation of wait, it's not working my slide. Okay, is it? I will start by presenting the situation of Indonesian Christian communities in relation to SOGI debates and the significance of the study. Then I will briefly present international academic literature, and finally I will discuss the initial findings of the study. Okay, SOGI debates among Indonesian Christian community. So discussing LGBT in the contemporary context of Indonesian Christianity, we cannot not talking about the official statement on LGBT released in 2016 by PGI, the oldest and the largest interdenominational church organization in Indonesia. The statement expresses support for the recognition and protection of LGBT rights. In the context of mainly conservative Indonesian Christians, the statement was furiously responded by various Christian groups, both within and outside of PGI. So who were the people behind the statement, or to be precise, what kind of activism had taken place so that this affirming statement was released despite controversies. In researching LGBT Christians in Indonesia, it is apparent that the hub for LGBT Christian activism is the Center for Gender, Sexuality, and Trauma Studies at the Jakarta Theological Seminary, with the amazing Pastor Stephen as the main figure, connecting progressive theologians, academics, and church ministers. Sorry, my slide is not working again. The Jakarta Theological Seminary itself is the oldest and the most progressive, in my opinion, seminary in Indonesia. The center has conducted annual international conferences on Christianity and sexuality since 2013, published books, and maintained activist communication through social media groups. Backlashes are abound, particularly from evangelical preachers like Yakub Trihandoko and most significantly Andik Wijaya, with their campaigns, seminars, and books. While both camps usually conducted their campaigns separately, a rare moment was this seminar at the Petra Christian University in 2019, just before the pandemic, where a conservative and a progressive theologian were put in a stage together. Listening to the debate, I cannot help but thinking how it mirrors the condition in other international contexts, where the fast-growing evangelical churches tend to condemn LGBT, while the affirming ones are progressive groups within mainline or ecumenical denominations. So within the nationwide network of LGBT affirming Christian activists I am currently part of, there is hardly any Christian leaders affiliated with evangelical denomination. Considering the magnitude of evangelical growth in Indonesia, a crucial strategy of LGBT activism here might be to develop affirming discourses from within evangelical traditions themselves. So the aims of the current study are to begin identifying and initiating conversation with Indonesian evangelical Christians and church leaders who hold LGBT affirming position. And secondly, to explore theological, discursive, and congregational resources underpinning their affirming position. More specifically, I am focusing on the Pentecostal and Neo-Pentecostal churches, which is the major groups within the Indonesian evangelical tradition. So Pentecostalism is one of the fastest growing church denominations in the world. For those who are unfamiliar with Pentecostal church, some of its key characteristics are biblicism, or high view of the scripture, where biblical authority is consistently upheld. Revivalism, that is the renewal of one's spiritual life, more popularly known as being born again. The third is a strong emphasis on, sorry, my slide's not working. Strong emphasis on the work of the Holy Spirit, which is even more emphasized in the Neo-Pentecostal or charismatic movement.
Ini ia juga lebih menekankan terhadap pergerakan Pentekostalisme dan karismatik. Jadi di situ ada baptisme terhadap Roh Kudus dan juga dan lain-lain. Dari sisi liturgi, mereka menggunakan musik-musik modern atau bahkan konser yang cocok dengan pergerakan orang-orang Kristen di Indonesia yang muda pada saat ini. Di Pentekostalisme biasanya mereka melihat moralitas dari sisi perspektif konservatif. Nah, dari sisi review literatur,
Troy Perry, the founder of Metropolitan Community Church in the US, has drawn heavily on Pentecostal rhetoric and practices of revivalism. In the academia, this is Scott Tuma's article in 1991 on gay evangelicals. However, the growth of academic studies about affirming evangelicals has significantly increased in recent years. Quantitative studies have identified the trend among contemporary evangelicals to be more affirming, or at least ambivalent about LGBTs. This is a brilliant article recently published in Theology and Sexuality Journal about affirming evangelical movements such as the Gay Christian Network and the Reformation Project. Even there is a PhD thesis specifically researching the Reformation Project, and the founder, Matthew Fines, who left his study at Harvard University to study what Bible really says about same-sex sexuality. There are also similar studies outside of the West, like this one in South Korea and this one in Brazil. What is evident from these studies is that the possibility for affirming evangelicals is wide open, but we really need more understanding about their ways of seeing and being affirming evangelicals, particularly from various local contexts. For instance, while Western scientific rationalism tends to focus on biblical reinterpretations, I will demonstrate that there are various other possibilities from within Pentecostal traditions, especially in Indonesia. So this is the project, the movement in the US that I spoken before. So in the current study, I have interviewed 2 affirming Pentecostal church leaders and 2 affirming church youth. Disclaimer, I'm not generalizing my analysis. Participants' narratives here are illustrative rather than exhaustive. And here are my initial findings. The first characteristic of Pentecostal Christians, which I argue can be a resource for affirming position, is a strong sense of personal agency. While on the one hand, Pentecostalism has strong commitment to moral obedience, on the other hand, who and how to define moral truth is highly contestable. Personal disagreement with religious authority in terms of morality is not uncommon. Here is one example from my interview with Maggie when I asked her about her disagreement with her pastors. She said, pastors are humans, not God. Not all they say are true. Some pastors even do immoral things. Youth leaders who are seemingly pious do not necessarily walk their talk. What is true is what my heart says, the word of God I read, being close to God. Maggie feels completely fine to be in moral disagreement with her pastors. When I challenge her, she refers to examples of hypocrisy and misconduct of Christian leaders, including youth leaders in her church. Another source of individual sense of agency is personal experience with God and the habit of personal Bible reading and learning. Julius, a gay participant, firmly believed that God does not condemn his sexuality because in his personal prayer, he felt that God loves and welcomes him just the way he is. Tony, an ally, a pastor and a lecturer in a Pentecostal seminary, asked for signs from God when he encountered queer theology. The signs came, such as meeting people like me, and it convinced him that God has led him to this truth, despite being unpopular. The Protestant belief that Christians have direct access to God and knowledge of God and God's revelation in the Bible was quite pronounced in Pentecostal traditions. These participants display the spiritual gift of discernment. They refer to the biblical scripture of judging trees by their fruit. Bold, confident, and fearless because God is with them were my impressions of these participants, which is reminiscent of who I was as a Pentecostal Christian. The second resource I identify in the data is the tight-knit community typical in Pentecostal churches. Here is a narrative from Julius. All accept me, all are tolerant, we have a strong sense of kekeluargaan, nobody accuses LGBT as sinful, never being mentioned in the sermon, it's just an ordinary thing. They all are relaxed about it. Living in a rural Indonesian town, Julius claimed that he had no rejection whatsoever from the church community. Family and friends have been in that small church for years. Everyone knows everyone. Julius has never come out publicly, but closest friends knew, and most likely everyone else knew, considering how gossiping is very common, according to him. They know that he is a nice human being, not an evil gay predator. As a result, he holds youth leadership position in the church for many years. In the urban context, Maggie's relatively larger church provided her with an opportunity to meet an effeminate male youth. The encounter eroded stereotypes and presumptions and humanized Maggie's view of LGBT. The Pentecostal pastoral practice of hospitality and taking care of each other in small groups also beneficial for Julius, who has maintained or ngemong a circle of LGBT youth in his town. The importance of such intense sociality and affective networks as parts of Pentecostal congregational culture has also been reported in other studies, such as in South Korea, where a married male elder came out as gay, but the congregation decided to keep him as elder because they all knew his moral strength, personality, and genuine love of God. This tight-knit community is often unavailable in affirming mainline or ecumenical churches, such as in South Korea, where openly affirming churches were a near atheist liberal church and a leftist church who had more strict protests rather than fellowship gatherings. And the third and final contextual resource emerged in my initial analysis is the nature of Pentecostal church institution. Sorry. Something's not right with my anyway. Sorry, maybe the devil doesn't like the presentation, so it keeps giving me technical problems. Anyway, I'll just go without my slide. The nature of Pentecostal church institution, which is relatively self-governed, theologically, institutionally, and financially, and therefore, to a degree, market-driven. Tony's current church and seminary was founded by a Bible scholar and a charismatic leader, who is considered controversial by some Christians because of his unique doctrines on salvation and Trinity. With more than 10,000 church members, Tony and the church leaders are, in his word, experts in managing controversies such as avoiding social media debates, limiting what to say during Sunday worship, and discussing difficult doctrines only in educational or Bible study settings. Learning queer theology for Tony in his church is just another controversy to manage. While having a degree of theological independence, Pentecostal churches relies heavily on the congregation to survive financially. This is even more perceptible in Julius' rural church, where resources are very limited. Julius said that his church is very anxious about losing members, particularly in the context of rural people he characterized as loving gossips and easily offended, gampang tersinggung. So in this context, moralistic pressures are low and differences are tolerated because the church wants people to stick around. In the urban context, the Pentecostal church's market is getting increasingly educated, middle class, and even multinational. Tony said that talking about LGBT from scientific perspective is a good start, as his urban congregation believe in science. Maggie was initially interested in gender equality, justice, and rights in her university study before she arrived at the LGBT issue. In Nikki's English-speaking international church, expats and Indonesians returning from overseas like himself take for granted democratic values and respect for personhood in their doings of religion. In such urban and cosmopolitan context, the church is not and cannot be too harsh on LGBT. Interestingly, during the interview, Nicky refers several times to classic Pentecostal or charismatic church to contrast his church from them. Despite the apparent Pentecostal outlook of his church, his theology is not mainstream, such as how he emphasized the descent of Holy Spirit as an inclusive moment, the God's expanding love and justice to all people, and how he is uncomfortable with top-down toxic hermeneutics. To conclude, there is a plethora of contextual resources, theological, institutional, and congregational, within the ostensibly conservative Pentecostal traditions, which can be drawn upon to advance affirming positions. To keep exploring, identifying, and circulating such possibility might be a crucial strategy for LGBT Christian activism in Indonesia and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Mr. Teguh for your presentations. It's very interesting research. We are very looking forward for the result. It's a progressive research for the sexuality and gender diversity in the context of Indonesian and of course in the perspective of Pentecostal churches. And hope everything will go smoothly, and we are very looking forward for the result. And for the next speaker is Dr. Bojana Radovanovic, who will discuss the gender fluidity, the fluidity of gender. And before I invite Dr. Bojana, please, for everyone who wants to ask questions, you can drop your question in the chat box, or later I'll invite you to raise your hand. And for Dr. Bojana Radovanovic, you have 15 minutes for your presentation, and time is yours.
Thank you, Naila, and thank you and the organizers for inviting me here. And yes, I'm very happy to be here. And let me share my screen now with you. So I hope you hear me well. Okay, so yes, is this already the entire screen? Yes, I think it is. So now I will talk about something more historical. I will give you a more historical perspective. And as I think that for all this contemporary debates, it's of course very important to go into the past and to see where it all began, at least regarding Christianity. And I will speak a little bit on fluidity of gender, but also on the view on homosexuality in early Christianity and the Middle Ages. First, we must discuss a little bit the terms. The terms used for the term norma from Latin derives from a square used by carpenters, builders, and surveyors to obtain a right angle. So the meaning of norma extends figuratively to refer to a rule or pattern or precept of practice or behavior. The question is whether norma was used in relationship to sexuality or sexual behavior in the Middle Ages. But
formalitas digunakan untuk sesuatu yang berkaitan dengan seksualitas.
With sexual activity judged according to whether it was natural or against nature. But
Seksualitas kemudian ditentukan dari apakah itu natural atau tidak natural. Bahkan di pertengahan. Di masa-masa Kristen awal, pada beberapa pengalaman tentang homoseksualitas berdasarkan masa itu, dan juga pada di zaman itu, ada beberapa hal yang terbatas. Seksualitas dalam kekristenan
as Orthodox Christian Church and other religious
diakui oleh Ortodok Kekristenan dan Heritage.
Although the early church
Jadi,
made attempts to forbid and control homosexuality, harsh repression began only in the High Middle Ages. So this development can be linked with Gregorian reforms occurred in the 11th century and the rise of centralized monarchy. We know that in ancient Greece and Rome, the ancient Greeks attached no great social significance to the sex of sexual partners. We know that both male and female lovers were accorded the equal status. Male homosexuality among the ancient Greeks has been regarded commonly as having arisen as an expression of the comradeship of arms among the warriors. And we know that there were some expressions of distaste for homosexuality in Roman literature, but negative attitudes were more centered on effeminacy and coercion. And there was probably no law against homosexuality per se until late in the Roman Empire. So now, just general, these are all overviews, of course, just overview of what we have in a little bit of the scriptures on gender. And here, with Philo of Judea in the 1st century, we encounter the difference between male and female, and this allegorical implication that male is superior to female because he represents rational parts of the soul, where female represents the less rational. And then Saint Jerome, he says, from the 4th century, as long as woman is for birth and children, she's different, as is the body from soul. And in the Old Testament, the only general prohibition against male homosexuality is found in Hebrew scripture, is found in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So this dates from post-exilic time, so after the 6th century before Christ. But what is important to say, the broad acceptance of homosexuality, which was attested in ancient Mediterranean world before the appearance of Christendom, ended in late antiquity with the spread of asceticism, which was hostile to all forms of sexual pleasure. Between good and evil, spirit and flesh, male and female. So there was this dichotomy, separating the material from spiritual, good from evil, body from the soul. And later, in the early Middle Ages, and especially High Middle Ages, there is the appearance of some dualist heresies, which also made this strong accent on the dichotomy between body and soul. And now, what is important to say, this early Christian ascetic literature started to flourish early in the Christian era. And the influence of these ideas appears to have been wide. We know that, so thus the early Christian writings were generally antagonistic to homosexuality, and this hostility to homosexuality was not directed against homosexuality alone, but it was directed against all forms of sexual
interpretasi alegorikal, terutama tentang iman dan spiritus.
The participants.
You have a good trip.
Please. So In the Gnostic text, or in the 2nd century, we have this difference between spiritus and anima. Basically, spiritus is spirit, and it's a masculine noun, and anima represents soul, feminine. And this difference is also, we have it in almost all other modern languages today. So I will explain it later. And now what is important to say on this asceticism and linked to fluidity of gender is always, as I said, linked to allegorical sense that spirit, the spiritual quest represents later one of the key mystical terms in ensuring the unity with the divine. Was pursued by ascetics and mystics in the early Middle Ages and late Middle Ages, when we have often this effect when women would renounce marriage and marital status and choose the ascetic lifestyle. And sometimes they often transvested. And but what happened here, when we have this, we should see later cases of women who transvested and who were basically female saints in the church, Christian church. They often rose suspicions on their homosexuality because they renounced to heterosexual life. And that is an important thing to remember. So, for example, at Synod of Gangra in the middle 4th century, the wearing of men's clothing was condemned. And also cutting hair from pretending asceticism. And then what is also important to say in the patristics in the 4th and 5th century, the patristic literature of the church fathers, they shifted focus to virginity by making virginity a major component in the quest for personal purity and spirituality. And so sexual abstinence replaced martyrdom and could also be seen as a segment, a lighter segment of martyrdom, and in the aim of in imitating Christ, what is called imitatio Christi. So this Christian opposition to homosexuality reflected a broader rejection, as I said, of all sexual experiences which were not intended to lead to procreation within marriage. And
Seksualitas juga dilihat lensa dari para teologi, ahli teologi awal Kristen.
For example, Saint Basil of Nyssa says, "He who is guilty of unseemliness with males will be under discipline for the same time as adulterers." Or Saint Gregory of Nyssa said, "Both heterosexual adultery and homosexual intercourse are unlawful pleasures." This then there was a Council of Elvira in 309. It was the first council to formulate canons for the regulation of sexuality. The one decree dealing with homosexuality specified that men who engaged in sexual relations with boys should not be admitted to communion. And other canons specify the same penalties for adulterous women and women in prostitution. So there were also a number of penalties for homosexual and heterosexual offenses. So as we see, this was often similarly treated. Then further legislation, as I said, it was in the 4th century, and then we simply, what is important to say is we simply do not know enough about attitudes among different strata of society. We don't know what the public opinion on homosexuality was, or we don't know well enough. But what is the repression of homosexuality was not a high priority of the government. And in the early Christian times. There was another main concern for legislation was various heretical groups were accused of violating the norms of sexual morality, including homosexual relations. This accusation was especially aimed at the Cathars in the High Middle Ages and the Bogomils and other dualists who refused marriage and procreation and were consequently charged with preferring homosexual relations. But these denunciations, the heretics and homosexuals, were often brought by these denunciations into one general group of sinners. The opposition to homosexuals was bound to law, but they were not executed as were the heretics. The bottom line is, as I may round it up this way, for the Christian medieval society, the main danger were not the homosexuals, but the heretics, who were descended from the church, thus representing a threat for the social order and stability. Then important legislation to mention is Justinian's legislation. Justinian was a Byzantine emperor in the middle of the 6th century, and he issued two decrees of law on homosexuality. He's very famous for the legislation he worked on. So there were some hints indicating that there existed an active persecution of some homosexuals, but these laws of Justinian are more on morality, on introducing and reinforcing more social moral norms, and he says that certain acts are judged to be contrary to nature, such like unlawful lusts and impious acts, and there were punishments foreseen for those acts. Then the following legislation, important one, is from Leo III in the first half of the 8th century. What is interesting is that sexual actions Leo III commented upon were enlisted, homosexuality was enlisted among other sexual activities like adultery, fornication, carnal knowledge of a nun, husband who is cognizant of his wife's adultery, and incest, for example. And but there were also some important and interesting points to make. For example, we have hagiographical literature on the lives of the saints. So as we have, for example, life of Saint Theodore of Sicyon, 7th century Byzantium, where we have this
ada istilah adelphophobia.
We don't know exactly if the story narrates the homoerotic relations or homophilic relations between men, because it describes the intense male-to-male relationship. And we should also remember Aristotle's definition of friends, two souls in one body. So just to tell you that boundaries were sometimes blurred and we cannot be certain. On the West, on the medieval West, I must mention Alcuin in the 8th century. He's an Anglo-Saxon scholar. He deplored incest and adultery, but not homosexuality. And we know that during the reign of Charlemagne in Francia, there was no penalty imposed to homosexuals. And now what is in
dalam konteks clerical,
Morianus, Book of Gomorrah, authored by St. Peter Damian. which is basically directed to the clergy and the issue of homosexuality in clerical ranks. So we know that the accusations of homosexuality against church officials were sometimes ignored. And we know also, yes, that the association between homosexuality and Christian monasticism also dates back to the early history of Cenobitic communities in late antiquity, but the references to homosexuality are almost completely absent. So now we don't have much time, but you will have my PowerPoints. There is a literature, list of literature at the end, and this was an appendix, just translating in pursuit of asexual virginity. As I told you, the fluidity of gender among some female saints who transvested, which I find very interesting as a topic. So this was existing in hagiographical narratives, and we have lots of this hagiographical transvestism and the narrative scheme of these stories, and many female saints in Christianity who transvested. Some of them were also repentant prostitutes. So here we have transvesting in the pursuit of asexual virginity. As I said, we have Santa Eugenia and many other. And then we have literature at the end. And I just wanted to add that this was this asexuality was an important motive also in the later Middle Ages, when we had
Ini penting untuk diketahui ketika kita ingin berbicara tentang dan juga sejarah. Dalam kasus tersebut ada banyak dengan homoseksualitas. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much for Dr. Bojana Radovanovic. It's very interesting. And thank you for all speakers for their presentation. And now we are going to move for the next sessions for the discussion and question answer session. And please, for the participants who want to ask question, you can drop your question in the chat box, or you can raise your hand for the direct communication with the speakers. And before I invite our honorable participants, I'd like to ask for all of our speakers from their presentation. We know that there are various perspectives about LGBTQ. There are also the pros and the cons, and we also know that the LGBTQ is the diversity among the human being. Well, please, could you explain the term of the diversity itself, because we know when we are talking about the sexuality, we must consider about the sexual orientation. We must consider about the behavior, the expressions, the identity, and also the biological sex. And does it the diversity means, or it is something else? Maybe the speakers can answer in order. Maybe I'd like to first ask for the Professor Ganzevoort, and then Professor Mufidah, and then Dr. Teguh and Dr. Bojana. Maybe Prof. Ganzevoort, could you please explain the diversity itself about the LGBTQ? Is it the diversity among the human beings, or it's regarding those the sexual orientation, the identity, the sexual biology, or something else in the perspective of religious texts? Thank you.
Well, thanks for pointing that out, Naila, and also the other presenters. I think this was a nice, rich combination of perspectives, which really helps to see that kind of diversity that you're mentioning. Because what are we precisely talking about? To define something as sexual or not sexual, is precisely on all those dimensions. Is it in your the way you experience your own body? Is it in the way you define your attractions to other people? Which ones do you call sexual? Which one do you not call sexual? Is it certain behavior that you can call sexual or not? So, for example, if you give a handshake to someone, in most cases that would not be considered a sexual act. Although in some circumstances it would already be seen as a transgression sexually, and that's one of the reasons why, for example, men and women in certain parts of Islamic tradition can be very careful not to do that. So to define something as sexual or not sexual is so we have a very different framework in which it is being assessed. And Bekti was asking in the chat about the human rights perspective, and again that is a very different one. So in the Netherlands, we do have a human rights perspective to equal rights. That's not about love, that's about rights. It's saying the government has no opinion about your sexual preferences, but we have an opinion about equal rights. And I think that legal perspective, again, is very different. Also in Prof. Jalil's presentation, I heard this legal perspective. It's a very different story again. So yes, I think your question is very pertinent, and we should always clarify, are we talking about personal preferences? Are we talking about behavior? Are we talking about the legal humanitarian perspective? Are we talking about the construction and the geopolitical perspective? I mean, all these are different stories, and we should clarify which one we're talking about. I'm not making it easier, I'm afraid.
Yes. Yes, and maybe for Prof. Dr. Mufidah, what do you think about the diversity itself, Ibu? Mungkin bisa dijelaskan tentang perbedaannya, diversity itself about the LGBTQ, tentang LGBTQ, apakah itu tentang ekspresinya, atau perilakunya, atau identitinya, atau seperti apa, Ibu? Please, for Dr. Mufidah. Ibu masih unmute? Ya.
Ya.
Thank you.
Terima kasih. Jadi saya akan sampaikan di sini untuk pertanyaan dari audien ya, bahwa yang dimaksud bahwa perbedaan ya antara orientasi seks dengan perilaku seks, yang lebih khusus lagi adalah perilaku seks yang disebut perilaku seks menyimpang. Jadi kata menyimpang itu sendiri kan juga dimaknai ini menyimpang apa enggak. Bagi perilaku LGBT itu adalah sesuatu yang menjadi konsekuensinya, tetapi pandangan yang berbeda tentang itu, yang kontra, pasti dia akan mengatakan itu adalah perilaku seks menyimpang gitu. Sekalipun apa itu misalnya di para dokter ya, dokter ahli kejiwaan ya yang ada di Indonesia itu sudah menerima bahwa itu adalah bukan perilaku yang menyimpang gitu ya. Tetapi orang yang berpandangan kontra dia masih mengatakan bahwa itu adalah penyimpangan gitu loh. Yang sesungguhnya itu adalah konsekuensi dari dia memilih dengan identitas gendernya itu dan juga dengan orientasi seks yang memang itu disebutnya secara alami. Ya, ini yang kemudian menjadi perbedaan-perbedaan pandangan. Kemudian di satu sisi bahwa orang yang memiliki orientasi seks, ya apakah dia itu biseks atau heteroseks, biseks atau homoseks atau lesbi atau dan lain sebagainya, itu sebenarnya kan tidak ada sesuatu yang dipersoalkan karena itu ada di dalam kehidupan gitu. Di sekitar saya juga banyak gitu, ada mahasiswa juga seperti itu ya. Dan dia tidak mengganggu apapun, dia bisa menjaga dirinya dan dia bisa tidak mengekspresikan perilaku yang disebut dengan penyimpangan seks oleh orang yang kontra LGBT gitu. Aman-aman saja, dia bisa bekerja dengan baik dan seterusnya, itu banyak terjadi di Indonesia gitu. Mengapa alasan mereka itu alasan mereka itu adalah dia memilih untuk agama saya mengajarkan seperti ini, lingkungan saya memaksakan saya untuk begini, ya udah saya akan mengambil yang di sini, dan dia beradaptasi dengan kehidupan seperti ini gitu ya, sekalipun itu juga menyakitkan. Nah, tadi disebutkan bahwa ada di chat ini tadi pernyataan tentang
in one of the question in the chat box saying that
kontra. Ya betul, memang itu adalah
saying that this is a sexual misconduct is a negative stigma. Now that is true. That is the fact. The term sexual misconduct is the term that is said by people who disagree and don't support LGBTQ. For people who support it, it's just a reality, and we need to support them because they're just a human being. And then the next question that I would like to answer is,
iya, kami di kelas juga selalu kami mengajar psikologi keluarga, kemudian mengajar juga sosiologi hukum Islam yang di dalamnya juga ada isu-isu tentang persoalan-persoalan global ya, seperti gender, kemudian juga trafficking dan juga persoalan LGBT. Nah, memang kalau kita berdiskusi di tingkat akademik, ya, kemudian kita sertai pula dengan penelitian dan sebagainya, itu memang ya nyaman begitu, tidak ada persoalan sesuatu yang heboh, sesuatu yang kemudian ada stigma-stigma dan sebagainya, karena ini adalah bagian dari realitas kehidupan. Kami di kelas juga fine-fine aja untuk membicarakan persoalan-persoalan ini. Kami bukan pelaku, tapi kami tidak menjustifikasi apapun. Ya, agama kami melarang, tapi kami hidup berdampingan. Nah, ini yang tetap akan kami jaga begitu. Saya dengan mahasiswa juga seperti itu cara pandang kita ya terhadap persoalan ini, karena memang itu Tuhan sudah mendesain sedemikian rupa yang kita tidak bisa melakukan. Misalnya kita bisa mengubah, silahkan, tapi mana mungkin kita akan bisa mengubah. Dan itu adalah bagian dari warna-warni kehidupan begitu. Nah, kemudian kalau kita melakukan penelitian pun itu dan juga mendiskusikan, itu juga harus
research in the research, however, you need to integrate between science
juga interdisipliner, karena ini menyangkut persoalan yang cukup rumit dan cukup banyak referensi yang harus kita padukan begitu. Kemudian ada lagi tadi ya, saya tanggapi. Jadi Ibu yang dari PGI tadi, memang PGI mengakui menerima ya. Kalau soal itu sih di Islam juga sebagian ya, sekalipun bukan mewakili Islam secara keseluruhan, masih ada juga yang tidak sama begitu. Itu ya bisa menerima dalam pergaulan dan sebagainya, tidak ada masalah apa-apa begitu ya. Tetapi yang belum sampai ke arah yang diinginkan itu kan hak-hak sipil. Misalnya bagaimana dia mendapatkan legalitas perkawinan sesama jenis. Lah itu kan yang masih cukup problematik yang ada di Indonesia. Saya bicara soal di Indonesia, bukan di tempat yang lain. Jadi itu menjadi pro kontra yang luar biasa ketika itu diskusinya ada di wilayah publik, ya, apalagi itu adalah di media elektronik yang bisa diikuti oleh banyak kalangan. Dan itu pasti yang akan dapat bullying itu adalah para pelaku dan para mereka yang mengusung LGBT, ya, itu yang dia akan seolah-olah dia akan mendapatkan kekerasan bertubi-tubi secara terbuka di masyarakat. Jadi seperti itulah ya. Jadi kami sendiri di Islam juga mendiskusikan itu sesuatu hal yang biasa. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much. Terima kasih Ibu Mufidah sudah menjawab juga pertanyaan dari para peserta. And maybe for Mr. Teguh Wijaya Mulya, can you please deliver your perception about the diversity itself?
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Naila. Saya merasa bersalah nih karena sudah di request untuk presentasi dalam bahasa Indonesia, tapi saya tidak sempat mengedit paper saya, jadi saya dalam bahasa Inggris. Saya jawabnya bahasa Indonesia aja sekarang. Ya campur-campur lah. Sexual diversity itu istilah yang ini ya. Saya rasa tadi Bapak Ruard benar, karena kita merepresentasikan perspektif yang berbeda-beda. Jadi saya akan coba untuk menyampaikan perspektif dari kelompok evangelical Pentecostal gitu ya. Diversity is evidence of God's intelligent design, gitu kan, keragaman, keindahan bumi ini, semua ini bukti dari kemahakuasaan Tuhan. Tetapi retorika yang sering dipakai di kelompok-kelompok konservatif adalah
used by the conservatives.
Dosa itu bukan bagian dari keragaman. Sin is not part of diversity.
It's not a part of diversity.
Dosa itu bukan hak asasi. Nah, itu yang kemudian retorika yang kemudian coba untuk mengcounter diskursus hak asasi manusia ini. Seringkali ungkapan-ungkapannya adalah hak asasi yang kebablasan, karena hak asasi yang membenarkan dosa. Itu yang retorika yang sering-sering saya dengar di tradisi Pentakosta di mana saya dibesarkan. Belum lagi retorika-retorika yang membangun animalistic behavior should not be justified gitu ya. Ketika relasi seksual sama jenis itu disamakan dengan binatang gitu ya, karena itu subhuman gitu. Itu kemudian membangun ilusi-ilusi tentang hak asasi itu tidak berlaku pada binatang gitu kan. Jadinya retorika-retorika seperti itu memang sangat dominan. Tapi saya melihat bahwa seringkali perdebatan itu tidak kemudian tidak mengubahkan. Yang mengubah adalah perjumpaan-perjumpaan yang kemudian persahabatan, perjumpaan-perjumpaan yang kemudian membuat disonansi antara apa yang dipikirkan dengan apa yang dirasakan itu menjadi welcoming, accepting without theological reinterpretation. Itu juga fenomena yang saya amati di antara rekan-rekan Kristen yang konservatif yang berada di lingkaran saya. Jadi itu mungkin sedikit tanggapan saya tentang sexual diversity. Terima kasih Mbak Nena.
Terima kasih Pak Teguh. Yeah, thank you so much. And the next, Dr. Bojana Radovanovic, maybe can you tell us about your perspective about the diversity and especially for the sexual diversity among us?
Yes, thank you, Naila. So diversity and especially sexual diversity, I mean, I think it's one of the keywords of our existence. I mean, we are all diverse, and of course, judging by various criteria. Sexual diversity is only one of these criteria, and it's equally important. And as Professor Ganzevoort said, it all depends on the context. How do you observe this diversity? I mean, the issue is very complex, and we can observe it from various angles and perspectives: moral, social, legal perspective, romantic perspective, and this gender diversity, as also it has been said, it's all about perspection of the other. So the important thing is who makes these judgments, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, within which limits, and in relation.
Diterima dan apa yang tidak. Siapa yang berhak mengatakan bahwa kita bisa punya hubungan dengan siapa?
These centers. The problem was disturbing the stability, disturbing the social order or the norm. So, and what was also said earlier by Professor Ganzevoort is this conservatism in the last years, increasing conservatism. I think it's because it all revolves around marginality. And so, as you said, polarization, and maybe it's all the consequence of this globalization and unification we testify to in this world that we are living today. And yes, it's so many criteria to be taken in consideration, and I'm sure that more discussion is needed in regarding this area. Very important. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Bojana. Yes, of course, in the society, for the ordinary people, in generally, we know about the normal life, and we do not understand, and we do not know about the non-binary itself. So we are of course, for the general society, we will see this non-binary issue, this LGBTQ issue is something else like the others, and of course there will be the pros and the cons, because we are going to talk about the diversity itself in the human beings, and we are going to talk about the human rights itself, and it's very complicated and very complex, but we must know that it's important for us because we have to understand the other condition, because we cannot ignore the diversity itself. And then thank you so much for all the speakers who answer my questions, and we are going to move for the question from the participant. I'd like to read for the question in the chat box. I think the first one is for Ibu Mufidah, and I think it's already answered by Prof. Mufidah about the sexual deviation and about the discussion in academic and research. And for the next question for Prof. Ganzevoort, I think it's already answered too by Prof. Ganzevoort about how is the perspective of human rights within conservative Christian community in Netherlands regarding the social status of the LGBT community. Okay, thank you for Bhakti. And for the others, okay, maybe for the others, we can open for direct communication with our speakers. Maybe for our honorable participants, would you please to raise your hand if you want to communicate directly with our speakers? Please, I can give you the times. Okay, there is Nuri Frankfurt. I'll invite Nuri to deliver your questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry that I don't open my video because with this network. But my question is actually to Professor Mufidah, because from what I've concluded in my head that it's still there's no confirm in there's no confirm yes about LGBTQ in Islam, and more often the same-sex marriage, because from what I also observed, there is still discussion about the openness to the transgender, transsexual, but not to the same-sex marriage. I mean, once you become, if he or she then turn into the opposite sex because of the health issues or for the mental issues, then they can marry to the opposite sex too. So it means that there is no open yes to the same-sex marriage in Islam. Is that so? Because I've seen that there's some not so clear about that. There is no compromise. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Nuri. And the question for Prof. Mufidah, untuk Ibu Mufidah, she asks about is it true if she conclude that there is still no confirmed yes to the issue of LGBTQ in Islam, including to same-sex marriage. Jadi untuk Ibu Mufidah, pertanyaannya apakah betul bahwa di Islam itu memang LGBTQ masih belum diterima dan terlebih khususnya pada pernikahan sesama jenis. But I think Ibu Mufidah has already explained, but maybe you can explain more for Nuri, Ibu. Mungkin Ibu Mufidah, Prof. Mufidah can explain, dapat menjelaskan lebih lanjut lagi untuk Nuri. Thank you.
Oke, terima kasih. Iya, jadi untuk perkawinan sesama jenis itu di Indonesia sudah disahkan ya, terutama adalah Profesor Mulya yang mencoba untuk mendiskusikan secara akademik, kemudian juga kajian-kajian teks, dan banyak pula para mahasiswa, kemudian juga dosen yang menulis tentang itu. Ada yang pro, ada yang kontra, ada yang juga bersikap moderat gitu. Nah, yang bersikap pro itu adalah memang seperti yang saya sampaikan tadi, itu alasan-alasan menggunakan bagaimana pendekatan ayat-ayat Al-Quran dan hadis, ya, kemudian menggunakan pemahaman dengan instrumen-instrumen penafsiran yang Bu Musda sampaikan itu adalah penafsiran yang agak kontekstual begitu, dengan pertimbangan-pertimbangan apakah itu empirik, kemudian pertimbangan-pertimbangan teks itu sendiri, pertimbangan HAM, dan juga untuk pertimbangan bagaimana sebagai warga negara Indonesia yang hidup dengan negara hukum yang di situ harus diatur demikian rupa. Nah, bagi mereka yang sampai sekarang mengapa tidak diperbolehkan atau belum adanya aturan untuk perkawinan sesama jenis, arus yang besar itu adalah arus yang tidak menerima, ya, baik itu di kalangan khususnya di Muslim, ya. Kalau di Muslim itu hampir semuanya adalah sepakat. Kalau toh ada yang mendukung pendapatnya Bu Musda itu sifatnya hanya wacana gitu. Jadi belum ada action yang real untuk sampai kepada ke arah sana. Nah, itulah yang menyebabkan mengapa di Indonesia itu kemudian hanya sebagai bahan-bahan kajian, kemudian penambahan wawasan, tapi saya yakin sekalipun itu hanya sekedar untuk mendiskusikan, meneliti, kemudian juga membuat konklusi, tapi itu membuka wacana yang dulunya itu sama sekali dianggap, kalau narasumber yang lain tadi mengatakan dianggapnya sebagai Pak Teguh, ya, dianggapnya sebagai binatang, sekelas binatang, bukan sekelas manusia, itu kemudian bisa disingkirkan pandangan seperti itu dan memanusiakan manusia itu sendiri. Jadi apapun pilihannya dia, apapun yang terbaik menurut mereka, itu adalah hak asasi yang harus dihormati. Setidaknya ada seperti itu. Yang kedua, bagi orang tua, keluarga yang kebetulan memiliki problem yang sama, dia akan bisa menyikapi lebih bijak. akan bisa mengarahkan lebih baik lagi, akan bisa menerima kondisi anak-anak mereka, kondisi keluarga mereka. Jadi diskusi terus harus dilakukan, apapun bentuknya, sekalipun belum sampai kepada bagaimana pelegalan terhadap perkawinan sesama jenis. Ya, karena itu tadi untuk keperluan memberikan pemahaman, memberikan wawasan kepada masyarakat bahwa ini adalah persoalan-persoalan kemanusiaan yang harus kita hargai dan kita tidak boleh menjadi kelompok-kelompok orang beragama yang kemudian angkuh dan tidak menyapa ya orang-orang di sekitar yang memiliki pilihan-pilihan yang berbeda. Jadi seperti itu Ibu Nuri. Terima kasih.
Hello.
Ya.
Okay, I'm sorry, my internet is unstable. Ya, terima kasih Ibu Profesor Mufidah. Terima kasih, thank you for the answer. And it's also, there is a question from Mr. Paul. For all speakers, he asked about what is the advice of the speakers, how to address this issue in the Christian and Islamic community. So I think I will invite Prof. Ganzevoort to answer first.
Maybe let me answer on two different levels. One is what does it mean for people in the LGBT community within Christianity and Islam? And I think the most important thing is to use the change toward a romantic language. I think in our societies, romanticism is becoming the key issue. Many people, even if they're very conservative, they believe that you should follow your heart, and if you find love, you should be true to yourself, even if that is not consistent with their moral view of sexuality. They would still hold to this romantic.
Nggak sejalan dengan pandangan masyarakat.
Change the world, then the language of romanticism is probably a very good one. At the same time, you should be clear about the medical and the legal issues, and that's more like a debate. But I think the language of romanticism is actually the most promising one for emancipation. Secondly, on the level of communities, I would say the most important thing for leaders in communities is to avoid polarization and to make sure that we acknowledge the good right of progressive and conservative views. And that you try to build conversations about it rather than the culture war that it sometimes is becoming. So yes, the language of romanticism will work for emancipation, but let's also make it a more, let's say, more a world of conversation and dialogue rather than one of polarization.
Thank you, Prof. Ruard. I'm sorry, I have to turn off my camera because of the unstable connection, and maybe Mr. Teguh, Dr. Teguh, can you give your advice?
Yes, thank you Pak Paul untuk pertanyaannya. Saya rasa ada begitu banyak garda untuk melakukan perubahan. Keep pushing all this. Keep pushing forward in this issue in various levels and ways, termasuk tadi yang disarankan Ruard tentang the language of love. Suatu hari saya bertemu Pak Dede Utomo di pasar dekat rumah saya. Pak Dede Utomo sebagai, ya saya rasa bapaknya aktivisme LGBT di Indonesia ya. Kemudian kami ngobrol-ngobrol, makan di sana waktu itu sebelum pandemi, dan ketika ngobrol-ngobrol saya begitu berkesan dengan optimisme beliau tentang bagaimana pergerakan aktivisme ke depannya di Indonesia. Dia mengatakan bahwa generasi muda adalah kunci. Dan generasi muda di Indonesia zaman sekarang semakin terbuka. Semakin terbuka. Tentu kita tidak bisa mengabaikan tumbuhnya kelompok-kelompok konservatif kelas menengah yang baru, tapi ada begitu banyak kemungkinan, ada begitu banyak cara, begitu banyak peluang, media, sosial media, BL dari Thailand itu yang begitu populer di antara mahasiswa-mahasiswa saya. Jadi bahasa-bahasa asasi manusia, bahasa-bahasa kemanusiaan, perjumpaan-perjumpaan, visibilitas yang lebih muncul dalam konteks persahabatan. Jadi perjumpaan-perjumpaan cara langsung itu begitu menumbuhkan rasa memanusiakan, dan itu seringkali bisa melampaui retorika religius pada level kognitif. Jadi kalau satu kata dari saya adalah perjumpaan, menurut saya itu cara untuk maju dalam isu ini di konteks Indonesia. Terima kasih, Naila.
Terima kasih Bapak Teguh. Thank you for Dr. Teguh. And then I'll invite Dr. Bojana for giving your advice.
Yes, thank you. This question is, of course, difficult to answer. First, because the Christian community is far from being united and homogeneous. We have so many. We have Orthodox, West, Christian churches, and others. So I think it's more a debate which should be led first, I don't know, in local levels, because many Christian communities are culturally and locally conditioned, yes. Always a set of local circumstances and social contexts. But then, of course, this could be one of the nice topics to be approached from a larger level of all the Christian churches. It would be nice to see an open attitude to debate, and as Professor Ganzevoort said, yes, to forget about polarization, to concentrate on the culture of debate and dialogue, openness. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bojana. And then I'd like to invite Dr. Mufidah for giving her answer for the advice. Silakan Ibu Prof. Mufidah untuk sarannya terkait dengan pertanyaannya Bapak Paul.
Terima kasih. Kata kunci yang penting adalah Islam sebagai agama rahmah, sebagai agama yang yang menebarkan kasih sayang bagi semesta alam tanpa batas, ya, tidak dapat dibatasi oleh apapun, ya, termasuk jenis kelamin, termasuk orientasi seks, dan juga berbagai bangsa, bahasa, dan etnis, agama, dan sebagainya. Kita harus bisa memahami bahwa kehidupan beragama itu adalah ada hubungan dengan Tuhan dan ada hubungan sesama manusia. Hubungan dengan Tuhan adalah sifatnya sangat personal, dan itu adalah bukan kita memilih hak untuk menentukan dosa atau bukan dosa, pahala atau tidak dapat pahala. Tetapi hubungan sesama manusia itu wajib untuk digalang, untuk dirawat, untuk dikembangkan menjadi lebih produktif, ya, karena kita hidup di dunia ini sesungguhnya adalah untuk mempersatukan, untuk perdamaian, dan untuk kerukunan bersama. Ya, terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Prof. Mufidah. Thank you for Prof. Mufidah. And here there is a question. I think it's for Dr. Bojana from Mbak Yusadia. Speaking of norma and natural term, can we say that this is a similar to nature versus nurture in our time? And further, do you think that because attitudes are changing and acceptance of the LGBT community is becoming more prevalent, people are more willing to accept the possibility that sexual orientation is determined biologically? In example, not a lifestyle choice. Please, Dr. Bojana.
Yes, thank you. But this question is basically aimed to everyone. So yes, do we think that people are more willing to accept the possibility that sexual orientation is determined biologically and not a lifestyle choice? I think this is a very complex question, and there are various views on that. So I don't know. I'm not sure that it has been accepted that it is biologically. I think there are mixed views on that, but maybe Professor Ganzevoort can clarify this issue.
Well, I think what we have seen in terms of emancipation in the last two centuries in many contexts is that the traditional prohibition of homosexuality at some point was medicalized. And so at some point it was considered to be a medical condition, which first was seen as something to be treated, and later something that should be accepted as a form of medical or biological diversity. Similarly, it was first legal, and then it became sometimes legalized in the more recent penal codes. But then at some point it became, in human rights perspective, it became more accepted. So you can see that the medical, the psychological, the legal, and also the moral dimensions, that all of them have been negotiated in the past two centuries internationally. Now, you can of course say, well, if you claim that it is just a form of biological diversity, because we do know that in many animal species, there are forms of homosexual behavior. So maybe we should just see it as a part of the natural diversity of creation and so on. But then, of course, that is a medical response or a biological response that does not answer your moral questions. So it is still possible to say, yes, this is a normal natural behavior. That does not mean that humans should engage in it. I mean, that is still a moral decision to be made, which is not decided by your medical answers. So I'm a little bit cautious to try to use the biological reasoning or the medical reasoning, although I do think that it is much more natural and in that sense biologically normal than conservative views discuss. But the conservative is not about the biological. In the end, it is about a moral discussion. And you should not conflate that too easily.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bojana and Prof. Ganzevoort, for the answer. And I think I can provide for our last question from Bayus too. The question for all speakers, can you comment on the statement of gay rights oppose the rights of others, and homosexuals already enjoy equality and even more? Could you please give your perspective for all the speakers? Maybe from Dr. Bojana first, I think.
Thank you. So this is, of course, an important question, as it arises this comment which we often hear. I think it's just the reason is try to find excuses for being against and for objecting, refusing to accept this diversity around us. I think this is just one of the excuses. Yes, we hear it often, unfortunately, and here we see what I said earlier, that it's also always the question of rights related to whom, or in relation to what and to why, to the other, and of positioning themselves as the others, and homosexuals as yes, the strange element, or the otherness, always marginalizing, yes, and separating groups. That's the problem in thinking, I think.
Okay, maybe Dr. Bojana, because our time limitation and we are near of the end of this agenda, maybe you can also give your closing statement for our discussion today.
Well, it was a beautiful panel, and I'm very happy and proud to be here. And I think more panels like this are needed, and webinars. And this is really one of the burning topics of our society and the age we live in. And I think it should be treated seriously from different perspectives and from experts as well as people involved in this problem and people who live with this on a daily basis. And I think it should be approached from the perspective of this exclusivity and inclusivity, and the tendency maybe to overlook the diversity of which this world has been made upon and has been made. And yes, against this globalization tendency, I think that we must all be placed in the same basket, and I think it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bojana Radovanovic. And I'll invite Prof. Mufidah Khalil to give your perspective about the question from Mbak Yus. Yes, and please, Prof.
Ya, tadi pertanyaannya kurang jelas ya didengar.
Jadi pertanyaannya bagaimana hak yang gay, haknya gay yang melawan yang berseberangan kayak gitu dengan hak orang lain seperti itu. Apakah memang betul homoseksual ini memang sudah diberikan kesetaraan kayak gitu atau sebagainya, atau seperti apa itu? Bagaimana kondisinya itu, Prof?
Ya, khususnya di Indonesia ya. Jadi memang di Indonesia masih tampak diskriminatif ya. Dalam hal ini adalah negara masih belum memberikan ruang sebagaimana yang ada di banyak negara yang sudah bisa menerima, tidak hanya menerima keberadaan, tetapi juga konsekuensi dari hak-hak sipil dan hak-hak asasi yang harus dipenuhi. Ya. Nah, itu memang belum ada di Indonesia karena begitu arus kuat yang ada pada mayoritas yang kontra terhadap LGBT ini masih sangat kuat. Tetapi bagi kita ya sebagai orang yang mengusung nilai-nilai kemanusiaan, kerukunan, kedamaian, ya kita tetap akan menjaga bahwa harus bisa melihat dengan clear, dengan jernih, dengan dengan banyak perspektif ya, supaya kita tidak salah untuk melakukan menjustifikasi dan kemudian memberikan pelabelan negatif terhadap orang yang memiliki orientasi seks yang berbeda-beda, dan itu adalah sebuah realitas yang harus kita akui. Ya, terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Prof. Mufidah, dan silakan Ibu dapat memberikan penutupnya untuk akhir dari diskusi ini.
Saya?
Iya, silakan Prof.
Ya, jadi diskusi ini menurut saya adalah sangat bagus. Saya beberapa kali mengikuti diskusi, bahkan juga Mbak Merlin ya, dulu di tahun 2003 kalau tidak salah, atau 2004, itu bersama saya mengisi di seminar, tidak hanya sekali, di beberapa tempat, dan saya menjelaskan kepada forum-forum yang ada di situ bahwa ini bukan makhluk aneh. Ini adalah sebuah realitas yang harus kita pahami bersama. Ada contoh konkret sebagai narasumber di situ. Dan ini yang kemudian saya sampaikan kepada banyak pihak, pada forum-forum dan sebagainya, yang mereka masih belum menerima, belum bisa memahami, bahkan juga menggunakan stigma-stigma negatif. Lah, forum-forum seperti ini adalah perlu ada dan perlu untuk dikembangkan, karena ini adalah tidak hanya persoalan bagaimana LGBTQ, tetapi juga persoalan kemanusiaan yang lebih luas dan memiliki dampak yang luas juga, tidak hanya di satu negara, tetapi ini adalah sudah menyangkut perdamaian dan menyangkut kenyamanan gitu ya, kenyamanan hidup bersama di berbagai ruang dan waktu.
Baik, terima kasih Prof. Mufidah, terima kasih atas kehadirannya. Thank you for Prof. Mufidah, and I'd like to invite Prof. Ganzevoort to answer the question and give the closing statements for our discussion today.
Terima kasih, Bu Naila. Well, to be honest, this statement of gay rights opposing rights of others and homosexuals already enjoy equality, to be honest, these are just lies. These are not true. It's not true that they are similar, that there is equality. As long as there is no webinar about the moral acceptability of heterosexuality, there's no equality. As long as homosexuals, transgenders have to constantly question themselves and allowed to be questioned, as long as they have to be have accounting of the possibility that the government or ministers or school teachers or whoever may suddenly speak out in public that they are not welcome on our university campus, for example, there's no equality. So there's a difference between countries. In my country, there's more freedom and more legal equality. But I've never seen, for example, at a soccer game, I've never seen the audience yelling straight man to someone, but they do call some players, you're sissy, you're gay, you're faggot, and so on. So there is no equality in that sense. And this lie, as I call it, is being used as a kind of a moral panic to try to gain power against the kind of emancipation that we are talking about. So I think we should be really honest about it. Gay rights opposing the rights of others, there is no such issue. That's just not happening. So the only thing that's happening is that we are expanding the rights to all of us. In the Netherlands, we speak sometimes of gay marriage. There is no such thing as a gay marriage in the Netherlands. What has happened is that marriage rights have been allowed to everybody, not just to people in a straight relationship. So there are no special gay rights. It's just allowing people the same rights, all of them. So let's be honest that these kind of statements are just lies. At the same time, let's be honest that these statements come from a certain fear. And I think we have to acknowledge that. Things are changing. Things are changing in our societies. Cultures are changing. Moral cultures are changing. And for some people, that is quite threatening. If you have always learned that the world is the way it is, that men and women are straight, that you would have one simple form of marriage or family that is defined by such definitions. Even if historically it has always been more diverse, if this is the view of the world, then it can be threatening to suddenly see that there is such a growing movement of inclusion and acceptance. And maybe these words of the statement are a lie, but let's try to understand that there is fear on all sides. There's fear on the side of LGBT people who feel excluded and marginalized, and for many reasons and good reasons. But there's also fear on conservative minds who see that the world that they knew is changing, and they may feel at a loss. So what I would be hoping for, and that might be my closing statement, is that we don't only cherish our fears, we don't only live from our fears, but that we can live from a vision of the world as it could be, as our religious traditions would call maybe even paradise, a world in which we can respect each other, in which we create space for each other, and which we can live in harmony together. To do so, we have to step on each other's toes, and that's going to be painful. We have to acknowledge that the presence of LGBT people is confronting and dangerous for some other people because they feel that their world is changing. So let's step on each other's toes. Let's engage in this kind of courageous conversation, because that's the only way, I think, towards living in that world that is promised in the visions of our religious traditions, a world of peace, of harmony, of acceptance, of love, of compassion. That would be my final statement. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you so much, Prof. Ganzevoort. And I'd like to invite Dr. Teguh for the last speakers to give the answer and the closing statements.
Thank you, Mbak Naila. Homosexuals already enjoy equality and even more. I don't think it's the case in Indonesia at the moment, so I will not respond to that one. Gay rights oppose rights of others. I think the debate was gay right violating religious rights, and then the response is, well, religious right is not the rights to hate or rights to discriminate, and then those kind of debates is, I think, very relevant with the previous chat by Papa Andre William about a perspective HAM, human rights perspective and religion. That human rights is a Western concept, trying to colonize our Indonesian modern society once again, so on and so forth. And then the response was, well, religions are not, most major religions in Indonesia are not local product anyway. It's imported from the Middle East and so on. So I would say that, as Ruard has identified, polarizing the discourse of human rights and religious discourses might not be very helpful in this case. I would suggest cross-referencing, dialogue, conversation, both in terms of texts and discourses, and also in real dialogue or real conversation. For example, it's much more strategic to claim that, well, Islam has already respect human rights long before the term human rights itself, or Islam has fought for social justice long before we know the term keadilan sosial in Pancasila, for example, to demonstrate that religion and rights are not two opposing ideas. Both has intersections and
itu adalah satu cara
keep sharpening the polarization and the debate. So my closing statement will be, it was a great afternoon here, and yeah, let's keep moving forward. Terus maju, Tuhan beserta kita. Amin.
Terima kasih, Dr. Teguh. Thank you for Dr. Teguh, and we are in the end of our discussion today, and I'd like to say thank you so much for all the speakers, for the wonderful materials and for the encouragement for us. And I think all the materials enlighten us, and maybe we can be better society. And then thank you so much. And I think this is also just beginning for us to discuss about the topic. And I hope that we can meet again in another occasion later. And
Naila, we lost you.
No voice. Where's her voice?
I'm sorry, we lost Naila. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ruard, Bojana, Mas Teguh, Ibu Mufidah. Excellent, excellent.
Excellent. Thank you, Naila. Can we have a photo?
A group
together?
Yes.
I hope everybody want to turn on their camera and video. Okay, I will. Mbak Yus, could you help me please with the photos group? Because in my screen is just one screen. I think it must be two screen. Maybe because the connection.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you.
In the maybe in the other.
Thank you, everybody.
They have to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So much for
everybody.
Thank you.
Could you?
Thank you for the all
Thank
speakers.
you.
Terima kasih semuanya.
Terima kasih semua.
Stay
Sampai
safe,
jumpa.
stay healthy.
Ya, makasih.
Sampai jumpa. Terima kasih.
Maaf Kak, sampai jumpa lagi.
Terima kasih Mbak
Thank
Yus.
you. Thank you. Very good
Naila.
speakers. Amazing.
Lengkap Pak Steve ya?
Yeah.
Dari background. Different background.
Nanti saya minta itunya ya, rekamannya ya, Christine.
Yeah.
Well, Christine might want to, but Christine, do you have a YouTube
Who has
video?
who has the
I
recording?
don't think so. Bujun, I think our consortium doesn't have any YouTube channel, I think, yeah? Yeah, we don't have.
But can we upload the video on our website?
I hope that NCMCR it's have a
Sorry, I
YouTube
was
channel.
unmuted. Yeah, we can upload it, but
Yeah.
as soon as I have it, I can put it on the website.
Okay, and
s-
also
send
maybe
the
YouTube
link.
channel.
YouTube channel, we don't. Yeah, because there were so little videos available, so we were not thinking of an own
Yeah.
YouTube channel, but we can do it, of course, when
In
there are
website.
more videos coming. Yeah.
Yeah, in website we can upload on
Honestly,
our.
but thank you all and sampai nanti.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ruard.
Oke.
Sudah ini boleh live ya?